Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Earn First podcast. My name is Arun Sudhaman. I'm the founding editor at Earn First. I am actually in Dubai today because we held the inaugural edition of our Praxis Summit in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi on Tuesday. And here to discuss some of the learning, some of the lessons, some of the action from the day, I'm very happy to be joined by Iman Issa, who's the co-founder and managing partner of a new firm called North 75, also in Dubai. Iman, how are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me here today, and congratulations on the event. It was a great success.
Well, thank you. It's our pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming to the event. Thank you for supporting it and staying all day. I hope you enjoyed it. Now let's dive right in. What were your sort of key takeaways and your overall um, perspective on the day?
Yeah. So I think overall it was a really interesting event. So some phenomenal speakers that came to the event as well. I think there were a couple of things that really stood out for me. One being the importance that continues to be placed on culture and talent here in the region, the importance of reputation for governments and institutions that are based
Mm,
here in the Middle East and the impact that they're having in the world around us. And of course, there was a lot of discussion around AI disruption and the need for us to have innovation in our industry as well.
mm. Yeah, I think that's three themes that you've mentioned there, all of which we see to varying degrees in different parts of the world. But it was really interesting to see how they're playing out here in the Middle East. What struck me in particular was the optimism around each of them. None of it was framed as um, especially challenging. That's quite a big contrast, and that struck me. I think one of the speakers even mentioned that they had been to Praxis in Singapore and they'd been to other events, and they'd found that you know kind of a downbeat tone to some of these conversations in terms of the challenges they pose for the industry. But there was a lot less of that on Tuesday, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on that. Do you feel that um, that's an accurate reflection of where things stand here?
Yeah, I do feel like overall the Middle East continues to be a really positive market. There is so much that is happening here, either economically or from an agency landscape. There continues to be huge opportunity. We recently attended the Edelman Trust Barometer launch as well, and there was a lot of
Mm,
really great insights that came out of that report that showed that trust in government remains high. Positivity in the region remains high. There are some concerns, as there are in all markets, but overall, people are excited about the opportunity that is in this market. Um,
mm,
there are sectors that are booming, from a destination and leisure perspective. There's a lot happening in Abu Dhabi. Dubai's always been a real destination space. There's huge amounts happening in Saudi Arabia as well. So I do think that positive momentum continues to be in our region. Of
mm,
course, with an undercurrent of some concerns here and there about the economy and what's happening in the world around us.
mm.
I would say that's
Yeah, and I think it was also helpful on Tuesday that there wasn't too much sugarcoating. People brought some reasonably significant concerns to the forefront. I think Alex Aitken, one of the speakers, former UK government communications head, who's now advising the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Abu Dhabi, he mentioned that telling great stories is important, but sometimes you have to be a little wary of being too overly positive about everything. Um, and Mazen Nahawi, in his presentation on the UAE's reputation, um, I thought he was quite challenging with some of his comments around governments needing to tell a more contextual story.
yeah.
Some of the negativity towards the UAE, particularly in from its neighbors in this region. Did that surprise you at all?
No, I think Martin's report was really honest, really thorough, really
Mm,
detailed. I think governments around this part of the world have lent into positive storytelling. But of course, we do sit in a region that has a lot happening politically. And so you
Mm,
will see that there are going to be negative comments. But
mhm,
even within that context, as communicators, our job is to help governments, brands, semi-government entities navigate those and to be, pragmatic and honest in a way that continues to drive the economy and business forward and continues to create a sense of safety for all people who are operating in the region. I think that's really
yeah.
important. One of the things that I found really interesting from Mazen's report was around quality of life. I thought it was
Mm,
interesting that maybe wasn't as high on the index as we should have seen.
mhm,
Markets like Saudi Arabia tend to talk about quality of life a lot, and if you go out with your friends in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, we're always talking about how great the quality of life is here. So I was quite surprised that didn't come through a little bit more. And I would agree with
mm,
Mazen that there's a lot that can be done to capitalize on how much of a great place it is to live, work, and play here.
mm. Yeah, maybe a little bit of complacency. I don't know, but your broader point around the importance of communicators helping their organizations navigate, that kind of scrutiny, whether it's negativity, whether it's just having to be maybe more candid and more honest about some challenges, I think is really well made. And I think actually it's, in a way, it kind of marks, it's really nice to see that kind of evolution of the sector. Brian Lott as well, during his interview, he's of course Mubadala chief communications officer, has held that role for I think more than 14 years, and he pointed out, he said you have to speak up, you have to trust your intuition in these rooms. You can't forget that. Yes, there's the data and all that stuff is really important, but um, that ability to kind of instinctively speak up, maybe question inside the rooms of leaders, that has never been more important. And do you feel that's something that this communicators in this region are rising to, that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I think senior communicators in this region are expected to have a point of view. They're
Mm,
expected to be really rigorous in how they communicate in the boardroom. You need to be able to voice an opinion and you need to be able to give sound advice. I think there is a danger of corporates or entities or even spokespeople being overly corporate, overly scripted.
mm,
People want to hear a voice that's really authentic, that has an intelligent, well informed point of view, and that they actually are able to deliver that and it will cut through. You see that in the media that when someone has a point of view that really cuts through, it resonates with people, they lean into it, they hear it a little bit more. And so
mm.
communicators have to sit in the boardroom and say to their executive and say to their spokespeople, we can tell our story, we can be mindful of the issues that we're facing, and we can navigate it and have a really clear point of view around some of these subjects.
Yeah, indeed. So coming back to the three areas you mentioned, you started off with talent and culture, and what stood out to you um, from that theme broadly?
Look, I think this region has a huge amount of talent that sits here. We talked about creativity. Lebanon, Egypt's always been massive talent hubs for creativity.
Mm,
Saudi Arabia is attracting some of the world's best communicators. The UAE is home to some of the world's best communicators. The battle for talent is really intense. And as you continue
mm,
to see disruptions happening in Europe and the US, more talent is coming into the market. Battle for talent in this market is really, really important. And as agencies, it's our role to make sure that the places that we create for people to come and work need to be safe. They need to encourage a degree of risk taking. They need to
mm,
have great opportunities for you to learn, to grow, to develop, but also to have fun so that you can
mm,
spend time thinking about the culture, the place that we work in, and all those good things. One of the things
mm.
that Joe said I actually really liked is when he asked the room, he said who he has been to a concert or an event recently. And actually, it's that reminder that you need to get away from your desk. You need to be out and about. You need to be living and breathing the culture if you're going to have a point of view on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the importance of culture was was something that really shone through. There were a couple of sessions, as Joe Lipscomb, of course, his session. He's the Romans head in this region. His session with Suki Godiwala from WIO, and also McLean Brody from MSL. His conversation with Meda from PepsiCo, um, I think really reminded everyone that for brands, being part of culture, it's kind of not really it's not really an option. It's not optional anymore. They almost have to live and breathe it. But to do that, that's not something that just happens. It does
No,
require, I
you need
think.
your team to be,
Yeah.
out and about. We talked a lot as well around social, what's happening in social, how people are experiencing content, consuming content. We are also home to an incredibly young population. They are
Mm,
curious, they are creative, they have a point of view. They're doing and experiencing really interesting changes in their markets as well. So we have to be
mm,
part of that culture. We have to have our finger on the pulse of culture. We have to understand what those trends are. And that, again, gives us an opportunity to then go in and advise brands on what they can do
mm,
to connect with their audiences around the
mm.
things that matter to them.
Is this something that you're aiming to put into play with your own new consultancy?
Yeah, I think for us at North 75, the real opportunity was to bridge the gap between having strong advisory, so being able to
Hmm.
go in and do that senior level advisory, but also have integrated communications that thinks about all of the channels and is able to deliver creative campaigns. It's something that I've always been really passionate about. I think the market has a desire for creativity, and there is a real opportunity to continue elevating the work. And we're seeing that as well from other agencies, that there is an
Mm,
appetite for interesting creative work that is designed differently, delivered differently, and doesn't put communicators in a box of you
mm.
can just do earned in this one simple way. It no longer works like that.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And again, I think it's something else that sort of signals the broader shift that's underway here. And dare I say, even the elevation of communications into something more strategic, and something that's more uh, influenced, not just by messaging, but by culture, by everything we live in. Um, the second thing you mentioned was around the sort of stories that governments are telling and countries are telling
Mhm.
in this region. We had we had a lot of people who work in communications from government or government linked entities in the room. And one of Brian Lott's comments, which I thought was quite interesting, was that he felt that the CCO role was um, moving into something he described as institutional diplomacy. And I wonder what you make of that from where you're sitting.
I think the person who sits on the client side has a huge responsibility when it comes to protecting and managing a brand's reputation, both
Mm,
across the public stakeholders and internal stakeholders. And I think the pressure on communicators has never been higher. We have extremely high expectations from what we want a brand to do, and that puts a lot of pressure on them. So, how you navigate those challenges and do so with a degree of diplomacy would be correct, but also doing so in a way that allows you to articulate fairly strong opinions at certain points of times as well.
mm. And what else stood out to you in terms of that kind of um, government slash national perspective when it comes to addressing some of their communications challenges?
I've done a lot of work, particularly in Saudi Arabia, with government,
Mm,
semi-government agencies, and I think what we tend to see is them having to balance national agendas with a desire to be bold and out there and innovative, but also being mindful of the government agendas and showing how they're supporting it. So I do
mm,
think that balancing act is really important to navigate, and at the same time making sure that as communicators, whenever we come forward with an idea or a creative campaign, it's being mindful of matching the balance between how we support what the government's trying to achieve and how we connect audiences and cultures together.
yeah, it's a really great point. And I wonder for private sector clients, is that a challenge at all? Because you kind of want to align with national strategy, but of course, you also have to be really mindful of the broader stakeholder landscape as well. And I wonder if that is something that for private sector clients that they're having to navigate.
I think each entity will approach something very differently, and I think it depends
Mm,
ultimately on what their business goal and business objective is. So if you are a consumer brand, obviously the way that you communicate and engage your audiences will be very different. But if you are a technology company that really has an opportunity to come in and to support a government agenda, then the way that you're going to be thinking about how you communicate will be tailored much more towards supporting those goals, supporting those ambitions as well. The same could be
mm,
said for hotel brands at a corporate level. The way that a corporate entity might be supporting a tourism vision or a tourism mandate will be very different to how they will talk to a consumer. So some of that conversation will be audience led and audience dictated because we do need to ultimately tailor how we communicate to different people.
mm. And then the third theme you mentioned was AI and disruption. Of course, is something I was a little amazed that we didn't actually have an AI session until kind of mid-afternoon, which I think is not a bad thing necessarily, because I think sometimes these conferences can get um, overly dominated by talk of AI. But of course, it's not something we can ignore. Um, let's start with opportunity or threat. What do you think?
Look, I think it's an opportunity. I'm optimistic about it. I think that every time there has been a new technology, you will see that there is a little bit of fear, a little bit of panic. Then you get the first mover advantage, people who are going away, they are curious, they are discovering, they are using it. Then you move into adoption, early adoption, widespread adoption. And I think what we're seeing right now is there is this tipping point of everyone's using AI in different ways. So the adoption is happening on a much more mass scale, but there is a lot of concern and then optimism around what that means for us, particularly in our industry. And I think ultimately, you know, it's about how you embrace it, how you use it, how you engage your clients around it, because everybody will have a different point of view. So it's not to
Mm,
say that this is how we should use it, this is how you should use it. It's to say, what are the ways in which makes sense for this project, for this client, or for this remit? And then you should be
mm,
adapting your AI usage in that way.
hmm. One of the questions from the floor about AI I thought was very telling. I think it was Mac from MSL who asked, what do you tell your clients who are expecting 20% savings now because more of the work is automated? So how would you answer that one?
I think it's a real challenge. I haven't actually seen a client ask me for a 20% saving just yet.
Good.
So
Glad
that's
to
probably
hear.
a good thing.
Yeah.
But I do think the point there is really around what is the brain power that we are bringing
Mm,
to the table? Because your brain power, and we are fundamentally a people first business, that
mhm,
still has weight, that still has value. What the technology does is it allows us to elevate, to enhance, or to be slightly more speedy on some of the delivery, but it does not take away from the senior counsel that sits at the boardroom table. It does not take
mhm,
away from the human intuition around culture, around people, around place. It does not take away from creativity. Can it enhance creativity? Absolutely. But we have amazing minds and we are fundamentally a people business. The product that you buy are our brains. So the
mhm,
technology to me is how you use it to elevate what we do, how to discover, how to elevate, how to be a bit smarter and a bit quicker, and to have time to think. I think a lot of times as communicators, we often say, we're so busy, we want more time to do that deep thinking. So what AI
mhm,
can often do for us is give us a bit more space to have deep thinking.
mm. Do you see it changing the consultancy model? Do you think that's something that is going to happen? You have the benefit of building from scratch. And would you say that AI is going to change how you build your firm?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the questions that Lisa and I were asking ourselves when we launched North 75 was what does an agency look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And it's also
Mm,
one of the reasons why our first hire is a managing director for data intelligence and AI, which is Kirsty O'Connor, who I would
mm,
argue is one of the smartest people for all of those things. And I think that
Hmm.
shows that we're really investing in the technology. We are thinking very carefully around how we build that into our services and really thinking about, where does the hero come in? And the hero would be the senior counsel, the brain power, working with our clients around what AI should be used for and should not be used for. And then really being quite smart about the tech platforms that we offer and what that means for data intelligence, reputation protection, reputation management. And of course, there is the speed and the automation, but clients want to fundamentally see that you are producing great quality work because
Mm.
otherwise they would have their team do it. And that's
Yeah.
not what we want at the end of the day. We still want to be a very valued partner that is able to come to the table to co create and to think about these problems in a sensible way.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think mastery is so important, and I still think it's something that the industry can struggle with, and I don't think it's unique to the public relations world. I think it's technology can be hard for everyone to get to grips with, but you often see this kind of 80% of an industry will just continue um, as if nothing has changed, and then 20% will innovate. And I feel like that will be a reasonably significant challenge for the industry.
I
Um,
almost want to go back, and I want to say 10 years ago, when social media platforms started becoming highly prevalent, there were
mm,
a lot of people in our industry who were really reluctant to adopt social into the
yeah.
communication space, right? Social was very
Mm,
much for marketeers, it wasn't for communicators.
mhm,
Influencers were all paid, it wasn't for us. But then you see that shift as well, right? Social
yeah.
is very much a channel, a tool for communicators. Influencers are very much a voice for us, for communicators, for brands to partner with. They are equally as important in some cases as the voice of a journalist or an earned platform. So I think all of these technology advancements will cause us to have a moment of disruption, a moment to rethink how we do things, and the ones
Mm,
that do succeed are the ones that embrace it. The
mhm,
benefit of being new is that every single team member who joins us will be joining us with an understanding of what our product is, what our approach is.
mm,
Whereas if you're an agency of 2, 3, 400 people and you have a top-down approach to technology integration, it becomes harder to cascade that technology to make
mm.
sure everyone is using it in the right way, is adopting it in the right way, and is able to articulate its value to clients. And that's something I used to see quite a lot as well.
Yeah, that is a fundamental point, I think, and maybe brings me neatly to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the rise of local homegrown consultancies in this region. We had one session with George Kiprayos, um, who's an advisor to consultancies that are growing and often looking for investment and selling. We had Nervik Singh, who of course was previously led WPP and now is chairing and advising many companies. And they talked about how the capital in this region is reshaping the consultancy sector. Maybe North 75 is an example of that too. But do you expect to see more homegrown players emerging?
I would hope so. I think we're
Mm,
at a tipping point now where you have classically seen, on the one hand, there are these large scale international brands that have been operating here for 30 plus years. Obviously, I
mm,
was part of one of those agencies for the better part of almost 20 years. They have phenomenal talent, phenomenal offerings. The work that they do is world class, and of course, they have access to their global network. They
mm,
can carry also some of the kind of heavy lift when it comes to payment terms and conditions in this region. The boutique agencies that typically have had a niche that they specialize in, right? So they
mm,
might focus on a particular sector or a particular service. And then in recent years, you've seen one or two consultancies that set up that do phenomenal, high quality senior advisory. What we've always seen is that there's a gap in the middle. Where is the opportunity for these larger scale independent agencies that can come in with the maturity to deliver at scale, to produce high quality advisory work and to do integrated communications work? And that's the gap that we see in the market, and that's why
mm,
we launched North 75. But it's also why we launched North 75 in collaboration with Parity. So obviously the Parity
Mm.
partnership
Yep.
allows us to have access to other outstanding national champions, independent agencies from Europe, from around the world that can also deliver outstanding work to clients. And that means that for us sitting here in this part of the world, we can tap into smart, intelligent people sitting in London or sitting in Brussels or sitting in Germany or sitting in the US. And clients still do want to draw on international expertise. So for me now,
Yep.
moving into this independent landscape, it's about how can I learn from my peers who have set up their own agencies? What are they doing that's slightly different? And that leads me to
Yeah.
my second point, which is why we joined the Alliance of Independent Agencies, which has been set up
Yep.
by Nick Walsh and the team. And that is also
Mhm.
about connecting, leading independents, making sure that they're able to learn from one another, but likewise that they can collaborate. So just like the big networks have partners that can do media buying or experiential, there are amazing homegrown agencies here that can do the full marketing mix. We just need to be better connected. And that's really what the
Mhm.
Alliance of Independent Agency does, is it brings us together as a collective to ensure we can deliver that service to clients.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Very good reminder that yes, you can be innovative and you can be homegrown and agile, but sometimes you do need that collective strength and sometimes you do need that global scale. It brings real benefits in different ways. Last thing I want to ask you about, actually, a comment from someone from another independent, Joe Lipscomb again, and he said, if PR keeps seeing itself as the last 10 yards of somebody else's idea, we'll never lead the creative conversation. Um, how big of a concern do you think that is?
Yeah, I actually love that comment from Joe. I think it's something that really resonates with me. Communications is an incredibly powerful tool, and there's nothing that frustrates me more than when I sit in a room full of marketeers and they say, but that's not your role, that's not your job. For
Mm,
us to really deliver impactful campaigns, it's about understanding that we can all work together and that storytelling has to be multi-channel.
mhm,
Communicators cannot just sit here and think about earned as a singular channel. There is an opportunity for us to work together in new and interesting ways. And actually, some of the best work that I think has been produced is when teams are working in a very collaborative way, and often when PR is being able to lead, because
mm,
fundamentally PR people are storytellers, and what people
yeah.
resonate with is stories.
Mhm. Again, I think that's another important shift that hopefully will accelerate as this region continues to evolve. Um, Iman, it's been really great talking to you. Thank you so much for your insights and your time and for supporting Praxis MENA.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been a really wonderful conversation, and we look forward to supporting you at the next edition.
Indeed.